So here we are, it's November. So what happens in November is, you look at nature and everything's like dead or dying. Um, in that, it's that season. And so the church is like, oh yeah, this is a good reminder that we're supposed to pray for the dead, and that we should remember our own death. And we're at the end of the liturgical year, so like all the readings start to be like end times and judgment, and so that's kind of where we are. November is dedicated to praying for the dead. We're in the octave of All Saints Day. So All Saints Day is November 1st. From November 1st to November 8th is the octave of All Saints. And we are especially praying for the dead. And actually, the church grants a plenary indulgence for every single day from November 1st through November 8th that you receive Holy Communion, you go to a cemetery and you pray for the dead. Any old prayer will do. Go to confession within 20 days before or after. Receive Holy Communion and pray for the Pope's intentions. As the regular requirements for an indulgence apply. So don't forget to do that. All right, so last year I did this. I did like a special series during November, and I did songs about people that have died. So because we're remembering the dead. So that was cool. I think it was good. It was kind of depressing. I wanted something similar but different. So this year, these are songs that are about death, but not necessarily about a person that died. But what I want to do is look at songs that are like about dying to self, like rebirth, really. The death that comes with baptism. We're baptized into Christ's death. Yeah. And resurrection. So, you might say, well, the church, celebrating death in November, and this is pagan because it's the nature, but actually, no, that we're not opposed to nature. God created nature. We don't worship nature, but we're like, hey, look what God's doing. And even Jesus, pointed to nature, and used examples in nature to help us to understand God, right? So, like, this is one of them. He said, unless the seed falls to the ground and dies, it can't bear fruit. Like, it can't then, give way to, new life, basically. So that's the kind of death that I'm talking about, like the seed that falls and dies, that it can then, become a tree or whatever. New life that comes from that, rebirth. So this song I think is perfect. This is Candlebox, Far Behind. So this song means a lot to me. It's personal favorite of mine, and of course, because when you listen to it, is like, it does sound like it's maybe written about somebody that died. And so that's kind of how I've always thought, like, okay, this is about having some kind of regret. When somebody dies, especially somebody dies tragically or suddenly, you're going to have regrets about how you treated that person. It's kind of like what's going on. But I want to go a little bit deeper, of course, it's what I do. And look at this song and look at, like, what if, okay, so, this song is about a person that dies in that way, that is going through some kind of a conversion, that is then so the person writing this, because from this perspective, the person writing the song is now lost this in their life because they have found Christ, and so they are kind of like dead to them in that way. kind of like that. All right, so kind of dealing with that loss of a friend because maybe you're not following Jesus and they are. And they've left you behind, right? Or far behind.
Now maybe did I mean to treat you bad, but I did anyway. And then maybe some would say your life was sad, but you lived it anyway. And so maybe your friends will stand around you, watch you crumble as you fall to the ground. And then someday your friends will stand beside as you were flying. Oh, you were flying oh so high. But then someday people look at you, the what they call their own, they watch you suffer. Yeah, here you're going home. And then someday we can take our time to brush the leaves aside so you can reach us. Hey, but you left me far behind.
All right. So that's a cool video, very grunge. The band's very grunge. I believe they're from Seattle. One of those Seattle grunge bands. So one thing that you'll notice, looking at the lyrics, is that one lyric that repeats itself a lot is the word maybe. So he's like, maybe. He says that a lot. What if things aren't what they seem? What if, maybe, things are not what they seem, right? Which is what we find in the spiritual order. What do we find when we start looking with the eyes of faith, that things aren't what they seem, right? That things are a lot of times the opposite of what they seem. And I think that's what's going on in this song. So like for instance, right after Rip, he's, well, okay, so maybe I didn't mean to treat you bad, but I did it anyway. Okay, so there's that regret. We're going to kind of come back to that. But he says, some would say your life was sad. So some would say your life was sad. So maybe it wasn't. Maybe what seems sad actually isn't. Right? Some would say your life was sad, so maybe it wasn't. Okay, but you lived it anyway. So maybe your friends, they stand around, they watch you crumble as you falter to the ground. So there's that seed, right? That's fallen to the ground. But we are made strong in our weakness, right? So maybe that falling to the ground, faltering to the ground, that crumbling is actually strengthening, right? It's giving way to this something better. See, because then it says, then someday your friends, they stand around as you're flying oh so high. So that's kind of pointing to like that. God's going to bring the greater good out of this. It says, but then someday people look at you for what they call their own, they watch you suffer. Okay, so the song's talking a lot about suffering. But we can see it as redemptive suffering, which basically means you take your suffering and you reunite it to Christ's suffering, and then that becomes a treasure, right? Saint Faustina says that the greatest treasure in life is her suffering, right? Because you united to Christ's suffering, and then it's redeemed, and God brings the greater good out of that. You die with Christ and then you rise with Christ, kind of idea here. So yeah, so the next lyric is, they hear you calling home. That's so your friends that are staying by you with this, they'll see you taking up a life of prayer. And then he says, and then someday we could take our time to brush the leaves aside so you can reach us. So like when I hear that lyric, I always immediately think of, you brush the leaves aside like you're looking at a grave, because that's when you would be brushing the leaves aside. So we can see that, like he's visiting a grave, which again points us to, we should pray for the dead, so they can reach us, so they can pray for us. But beyond that, I mean, we're talking about this death. The leaves that are falling to the ground that you're brushing to the side, that is a sign of death, right? Because that's like, the leaves are falling from the trees and stuff. Because we're in this season of death, and so he says, but hey, but you left me far behind. So what I'm saying is, if this was just about a person that died, then they would leave this person. They would leave you behind. But he left him far behind, right? So it's like there's more going on here than just natural death. This is you left me far behind. So this is about a person that has left to follow Christ, right? And then the person, the perspective of the person writing the song is maybe, has not taken that route, right? So he's been left far behind. And so that's why he's brushing the leaves aside. Because that's the rift between them, is that dying to self, right? That the one would have undergone. This video is really interesting, and I didn't even mention, so earlier in the video, there's this scene. You have this girl, and she's sitting like poolside, but the pool is empty. So it kind of made me think about the pool, and then she's like looking at her side, right? Like, what's going on with her side? She's looking at her side. So I think this is pointing towards, we're talking about redemptive suffering. We're talking about reuniting our pain, our suffering with Christ's suffering. So that can be, so the empty pool is kind of like, made me think about like Jesus before he died. When he was arrested, they put him in the cistern, and that was like this big pool that would be, the purpose was for ritualistic cleansing for the high priest before he went into the temple to give a sacrifice, right? But what happened was that, so it was the high priest Caiaphas, right? He had these pools in the basement of his house, and one of them was broken. Like, it had a crack in it, a leak in it, so there was no water in it. So they used it for as like a jail cell. So you have this pool with no water in it. So it's kind of like pointing towards that, like Jesus' passion, right? So Jesus was very fitting that he was in this pool because he is the high priest that's going to make the sacrifice, right, of himself on the altar of the cross. And And then, ultimately he would be pierced in his side, right? This girl's like looking at her side like there's nothing there. But maybe that's what she's looking for, is that wound, right? And there's like a comparison there, like, because Jesus would have been pierced through his heart, and then the blood and the water would come out. That's reminiscent of the animal sacrifice again in the temple. The blood and water would come out of the side of the temple when there was a sacrifice. So Jesus is the high priest that gives the sacrifice. Jesus is the Lamb of God. He is the sacrifice, and he is the temple. And when we unite our sufferings to Jesus, when we unite our sufferings to Jesus' suffering, right? So then, that's the temple. That's our sacrifice. Anyway, so this girl is kind of sitting poolside. She's not in there. She doesn't have the wound, so it's like she's not. Maybe she's representing the person singing the song that's not sharing in this pain. And then we get to this part where we have, it's interesting how this video shows this contrast. You have like the guy in the one room, and he's like painting the walls with this red paint, which can be seen as like blood splatter, right? And then they have like the guy singing the song. He's like in the room next door, and there's like this kind of contrast. So it's like the guy that's painting the walls with the, he's like pouring out of himself. He's like, that's like his blood or whatever. Like, like Jesus spilled his blood. Like this guy is, again, like following Jesus, picking up his cross, following in his footsteps, and pouring out of himself, right? And so we see that as like, oh, his life was so sad, because he's emptying himself. He's dying to self, right? And doing that, but really he is uniting to Christ so that he can rise with him, right? And gain eternal life, right? He says, I didn't mean to treat you oh so bad, but I did it anyway. So there's that, and we can understand that, like, the song's very reminiscent of, and I'm going to read it at the end, the story of the rich man and Lazarus, the poor man that dies. They both die, and in that story, the rich man goes to hell, and he's like looking at Lazarus, like, who's with the angels, with Abraham, and it was a sin of omission, right? Like he didn't actually do anything bad per se to the guy. He just didn't show mercy. He didn't help him. He didn't share in his pain. So it's almost kind of like what's going on in this song. He's like, I didn't mean to treat you bad. And maybe he didn't treat him bad. Maybe they were just friends, and maybe he was a great friend. Maybe he was, like, in a natural way. I'd give you the shirt off my back, do anything for you. And he was a really great, good person and a good friend, the way that we see it, in the worldly sense. But in the spiritual sense, just as a sin of omission, if he's not helping him to, to live a good life, worshiping God, and maybe he's kind of holding him back from that, either just by not being an influence, in that way, or, just living a very worldly life and just trying to, it's just being his friend and just being like, hey, let's do this and that, and not worry about so much about, worshiping God. And in that way, he's being a detriment to the guy's soul. Some would say you left with what you had, but you couldn't share the pain. I don't think it's because he couldn't share the pain like he wouldn't, or he wasn't able. Not that he wouldn't share the pain, but that he couldn't because nobody would share his pain with him.
could share the pain while she suffered. Now maybe could have made my own mistakes, but I live for what I've known. And then maybe we might share in something great. Won't you look at where we've grown? Won't you look at where we've gone? And then someday comes tomorrow, holds sense of what I feel for you in my mind. As you trip the fire line, and that cold day when you lost control. Shame you left my life so soon. You should have told me, hey, but you left me far behind.
Now maybe I could have made my own mistakes, but I live with what I've known. So it's like saying I could have taken a risk. Like I could have taken the risk of making the mistake, right? Which would be like a leap of faith, right? Like I could have acted in faith, that maybe would result in making mistakes, but instead I chose the steady, like the more, like I chose the sure path of what I know, right? Like I wasn't willing to take that risk, and but if I would have, then maybe we could have shared in something great, right? Like so. Again, acknowledging the path that this other person took, this is a good thing. Won't you look at where we've grown? Won't you look at where we've gone? So, acknowledging that there's these separate paths that they took. And then someday comes, or I think we're looking back to that someday when the other person now is flying high, right? He says, tomorrow holds a sense of what I fear for you in my mind as you trip the fine line. A cold day when you lost control. So again, like, you lost control. Well, that's kind of the aim of the spiritual life, right? Is to, like, not be in control. It's like to give it up to God and to surrender to God, and put God in control. So I think we can look at this like that's where this person got to, in a spiritual sense, and as an outsider might look at that and think, you've lost your mind, right? So, I mean, shame you left my life so soon. I mean, yeah, maybe the person died, but it could be that the person just, had to cut this guy off, because he's kind of erasing stuff from his life that's causing him to sin. If this person is a bad influence in that way, or even possibly maybe the guy felt called to the priesthood or religious life, so he actually physically left. This could be that, and again, from an outsider that would seem crazy. Like, what are you doing, He lost control. Yeah, he gave it up. He gave control to God, and he's just following God's will for him. Maybe he went on a mission. The American flag is kind of universally, I think, seen as like a symbol of freedom. And then the motorcycle, again, also like a symbol of freedom. So it's like, on the one hand, like the one guy, that's kind of like what he's after, right? And it's like his own sense of freedom, which is probably like the non-Christian sense of like, I just want to do whatever I want to do, right? And so that's why he's it's kind of contrast with this other guy. So the other guy, now we see this guy is in the bathtub. Very interesting. They show him with a rosary around his neck. He's like looking. The glasses are showing like, I don't know, it's not necessarily roses, but like flowery, like paradise looking thing. So it's like the Jews were that totally missed the Messiah, that were looking for like, the freedom from oppression of the Romans, like that. We could see that with like the American flag, even like this is like more of a worldly freedom that they're looking for. And in such case, they would totally miss the opportunity to share in this person's suffering, right? To pick up their cross and follow Jesus. Sorry, I'm going to read this. The parable of the rich man and Lazarus. It's Luke chapter 16, verses 19 through 31. There was a rich man who dressed in purple garments and fine linen, and dined sumptuously every day. And lying at his door was a poor man named Lazarus, covered with sores, who would gladly have eaten his fill of the scraps that fell from the rich man's table. Dogs even used to come and lick his sores. When the poor man died, he was carried away by angels to the bosom of Abraham. The rich man also died and was buried. And from the netherworld, where he was in torment, he raised his eyes and saw Abraham far off and Lazarus at his side. And he cried out, Father Abraham, have pity on me. Send Lazarus to dip the tip of his finger in water and cool my tongue, for I am suffering torment in these flames. Abraham replied, My child, remember that you received what was good during your lifetime, while Lazarus likewise received what was bad. But now he is comforted here, whereas you are tormented. Moreover, between us and you, a great chasm is established, to prevent anyone from crossing who might wish to go from our side to yours, or from your side to ours. He said, Then I beg you, Father, send him to my father's house. For I have 5 brothers, so that he may warn them, lest they too come to this place of torment. But Abraham replied, They have Moses and the prophets, let them listen to them. He said, Oh no, Father Abraham, but if someone from the dead goes to them, they will repent. Then Abraham said, If they will not listen to Moses and the prophets, neither will they be persuaded if someone should rise from the dead. So I think one thing that we definitely can take away from this, if we do have those feelings of regret with somebody that died, and maybe you didn't treat them so well, or whatever it is, that you can always pray for them. Pray for their soul. That's the best thing that you can do. And then in the process, God will bring the greater good. Trust in God that this might be just what was needed to save your soul.